We interrupt all regular transmissions with an emergency dispatch from the inner sanctum of the British monarchy, where a quiet, ruthless coup has just altered the trajectory of sovereign history forever. At this very hour, secret intelligence leaking from the heavy velvet curtains of Buckingham Palace confirms that an unprecedented seizure of power has been executed, not through parliamentary debate, but in total darkness, behind locked double doors where silence cuts deeper than an assassin's blade. A formal constitutional directive, just 4 pages long, has been signed into law, effectively stripping the Queen Consort of her titles, her senior privileges, and her place within the ruling circle. The realm stands on the precipice of absolute transformation, as an alliance between King Charles and Princess Anne strikes a decisive blow against the woman who believed her position was untouchable. Inside the soundproof study of Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere burned with the silent friction of absolute finality. King Charles sat motionless at his heavy mahogany desk, his hand hovering over the parchment with a tremor he could not suppress. Beside him stood Princess Anne, stiff, immovable, and shrouded in an aura of cold, uncompromising duty. There were no courtiers present. This was an execution of power designed to bypass every established line of defense. As the monarch's pen pressed against the paper, leaving a dark, indelible trail of ink beneath the decree, the silence was absolute, broken only by the synchronized ticking of the grand mantel clock and the heavy, rhythmic breath of a sovereign severing his personal happiness for the survival of the crown. Across the estate, completely oblivious to the strike launched against her, Camilla sat in her private sitting room, finalizing arrangements for an upcoming royal engagement. She held the telephone with the relaxed confidence of a woman who believed her supreme influence over the king was absolute. She did not know that at that precise second, the 4-page directive, bearing the king's official seal and validated by the Princess Royal's unyielding signature, was already being carried down the long, carpeted hallways by a sole courier. The decree was definitive. Camilla's title of Queen Consort was revoked. Her access to high-level governance, future accession councils, and sensitive briefings regarding Prince William's eventual reign was entirely terminated. When the discreet knock echoed against Camilla's door, the atmosphere shifted instantly. She dismissed her staff, breaking the red wax seal with calm curiosity that swiftly turned to paralyzed horror. Her eyes scanned the legal phrasing, her breathing shallow as the brutal reality of the document sank in. The cold language stripped away decades of carefully constructed legitimacy in a single paragraph. But what shattered her composure entirely was the signature of Princess Anne standing directly alongside that of the king, proof of a united front she had never deemed possible. Tucked behind the formal pages lay a brief, handwritten note from Charles himself. There were no affectionate codas and no apologies, only a cold line drawn in the sand, marking the total surrender of personal devotion to institutional survival. This monumental fracture did not emerge from a sudden outburst of rage. It was the culmination of a calculated shadow war that reached its boiling point weeks earlier within the hallowed walls of Windsor Castle. During a state ceremony designed to subtly affirm Prince William's expanding constitutional role, Camilla executed a silent power play. Moments before the doors opened, she quietly instructed an equerry to remove William's official ceremonial portfolio from the central table, substituting it with her own and placing herself directly between the king and the future heir. It was a non-verbal declaration of dominance. William's jaw tightened with restrained fury, choosing regal composure over immediate chaos. But Princess Anne's vigilant eyes tracked every second of the usurpation. In the narrow corridor immediately following the Windsor ceremony, the Princess Royal confronted her brother. Her words carried the explosive weight of an ultimatum. Charles's passive silence was not peace, but a dangerous surrender that allowed the Queen Consort to manipulate sovereign protocol at will. The suspicion deepened into undeniable proof days later, when intelligence reports revealed that Camilla's private office had actively attempted to requisition sensitive succession dossiers, strictly classified documents outlining William's future governing powers. The schemer had reached directly into the holy altar of the crown's future, leaving Charles with no choice but to authorize the ultimate purge. Now, as palace doors locked one by one, The monarch and his sister prepared to face the woman whose soaring ambition had triggered her irreversible downfall. Behind the gilded, soundproofed doors of the sovereign's estate, the invisible machinery of state power moved with predatory swiftness, enforcing a total institutional quarantine around the fallen queen consort. In the shadowed corridors of Clarence House, keycards were deactivated, security clearances revoked without explanation, and private access codes erased from sovereign databases before sunrise. Courtiers who had spent years bowing to Camilla's commands now passed her office in strained silence, sensing that her authority was utterly incinerated. The palace hierarchy, bound strictly to self-preservation, abandoned her instantly. Senior advisors who had once competed for her favor now covertly handed over encrypted files to Princess Anne, seeking absolution by exposing every secret attempt made by Camilla's faction to influence the crown's succession strategy. The true horror of the schism had detonated hours earlier inside the historic Clarence House drawing room, a space chosen by King Charles for its intimate walls, now transformed into a tribunal of unyielding reckoning. No private secretaries were permitted inside. No shorthand writers recorded the agonizing dialogue. Charles sat at one end of the room, visibly broken, his thumb tracing the worn edge of his teacup, while Camilla occupied the opposing chaise, her posture rigid with defensive fury. Standing between them like an impartial judge carved from marble was Princess Anne. On the table separating the sovereign from his wife lay two leather-bound folders, the altered Windsor Castle protocol files, and a terrifying second dossier detailing two secret attempts by Camilla's office to breach the vault containing Prince William's confidential governance briefs. The silence in the room was a suffocating weight that crushed the breath from Charles's chest. When Princess Anne finally spoke, her voice dropped with lethal precision, asking the singular question that exposed the core of the betrayal. Who had authorized the Queen Consort to place herself directly inside the constitutional line of succession? Camilla's chin lifted in sharp defiance as she attempted to reframe her machinations as an act of absolute devotion. She argued passionately that Charles's sovereign authority was being systematically eroded by Prince William's rising shadow cabinet, claiming that courtiers were quietly shifting allegiance to the young heir and treating the king as a temporary placeholder. She insisted that her covert maneuvers were designed solely to forge a secondary fortress of power around Charles, ensuring he remained the supreme ruler of the realm. Her desperate defense, however, only deepened the monarch's profound grief. Charles removed his rimless glasses with trembling hands, setting them upon the cold table as the agonizing truth crystallized in his mind. Camilla had not merely sought to protect him. She had presumed to act as sovereign without his knowledge or consent, operating on the arrogant assumption that his devotion would grant her immunity from constitutional law. When Anne revealed that palace legal officers had already rejected Camilla's first request for the succession files, only for her staff to submit a second, deceptive demand, the king's face turned pale as ash. He stared at his wife, not as a ruler addressing a subject, but as a deeply wounded man recognizing that the woman he had fought decades to elevate had ultimately compromised the very institution he was sworn to protect. With a single, decisive ringing of the desktop bell, Charles summoned the constitutional advisors waiting in the adjacent hallway, ordering the immediate execution of the decree. The process was ruthless and irreversible. Constitutional legal specialists had painstakingly decoupled the private sacrament of marriage from the public office of the crown. While Camilla would technically remain the king's wife in the eyes of God, her public identity, state funding, royal household, and official duties were systematically dismantled. Responsibilities were reassigned in real time. Senior patronages were transferred to Catherine, Princess of Wales, while internal administrative continuity was firmly seized by Princess Anne. Across the palace, Camilla watched her official schedule emptied line by line, transformed into a barren void. As night fell over London, the psychological isolation reached a harrowing crescendo. Inside his private sanctuary, King Charles sat in near total darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of his desktop lamp. Beside him lay his private phone, vibrating repeatedly as Camilla tried in vain to break through his wall of silence. Every unanswered call felt like a dagger twisting in his chest, yet he knew that a single moment of weakness would be seized upon as hesitation by a palace machine that demanded total ruthlessness. Across the courtyard, Camilla stood alone at her window, clutching a handwritten note from Charles that offered no mercy, watching the guards rotate outside, a stark, terrifying reminder that while the palace gates remained standing, her reign had met its ultimate, dark end. The midnight hour brought no respite to the sovereign estate, as the four central figures of the dynasty gathered for the final, catastrophic confrontation behind the soundproofed oak doors of the private royal apartment. The room was heavy with the suffocating scent of polished mahogany and old paper, illuminated only by the subdued embers of a marble fireplace. King Charles stood near the central table, a broken sovereign caught between the agonizing remnants of marital devotion and the crushing imperative of his crown. Beside him, Princess Anne maintained an unyielding, sentinel posture, while Prince William stood in the shadowed doorway, his jaw set in stone, representing the unshakable future of the line. Across from them stood Camilla, stripped of her courtiers and political apparatus, facing the unified wall of the family she had sought to maneuver against. The air vibrated with a lethal, suppressed energy where no elevated voices were needed. The silence itself carried the weight of an execution. Princess Anne opened the leather file resting on the table, her tone dropping into a deadly whisper that shattered the remaining illusions of hope. She revealed the devastating truth that had forced the monarch's hand. Prior to the signing of the decree, Anne had quietly submitted her own formal notification of intent to resign from all royal duties. She made it brutally clear that if Charles permitted his wife to tamper with the constitutional succession or alter William's sacred role, the Princess Royal would walk away from the monarchy forever, publicly exposing the rot within the palace core. It was an ultimate ultimatum, a choice between the wife who had overreached and the sister who embodied the very bloodline of the institution. Camilla's eyes darted to Charles, searching for a single ember of the passion that had once defied the entire world for her sake. She pleaded with desperate, razor-sharp eloquence, insisting that her actions were born of love, meant to shield an aging king from being diminished by his own ambitious heir. But the emotional weapon that had controlled Charles for decades failed to strike its target. When Camilla invoked the memory of the late Queen Elizabeth II, claiming the late monarch would have understood her devotion, Princess Anne delivered the killing blow. Anne declared with absolute, terrifying conviction that while their mother would have grieved for her son's personal heartbreak, Queen Elizabeth II would never have hesitated to sacrifice individual happiness on the altar of sovereign duty. The true shift in the balance of power occurred when Prince William finally stepped into the ring of light. His voice was devoid of malice, carrying instead the terrifying calm of an incoming sovereign. He looked at the woman who had attempted to erase his authority at Windsor Castle and declared that while she would be treated with personal dignity within the private confines of the family, her political existence within the government of the realm was forever terminated. He made it unmistakably clear that the future of the British crown would never again be subject to the shadows of palace intrigue or the personal vanity of a consort. The heir had spoken, and his word was reinforced by the absolute authority of the king beside him. Defeated, isolated, and stripped of all leverage, Camilla realized that her decades-long struggle for supreme acceptance had ended in absolute catastrophe. With trembling, pale fingers, she reached into her velvet handbag and withdrew the solid gold household seal, the symbolic instrument of her royal authority. As she slowly pressed the seal onto the table, sliding it across the polished wood toward Princess Anne, the heavy metal clicked against the surface like the final closing of a tomb. It was the definitive moment of total surrender. Hope vanished from Camilla's face, replaced by a hollow, frozen mask of quiet despair. The justice of the crown had triumphed, but as Charles watched the seal leave his wife's hands, he knew that in saving his monarchy, he had signed the ultimate death warrant of his own heart. In the gray light of a bitter London dawn, the formal public announcement was released to a stunned global audience, shattering the illusion of royal harmony and exposing the ruthless, predatory mechanics governing the British monarchy. News tickers across 6 continents blazed with the unthinkable headline: "The style, title, and authority of Queen Consort had been officially revoked by sovereign directive. Outside the grand iron gates of Buckingham Palace, throngs of citizens gathered beneath overcast skies, reading the terse, clinical text on their screens in stunned silence. The palace statement had been meticulously crafted by constitutional attorneys to project absolute stability, yet every syllable carried the brutal impact of an iron vault door slamming shut. Camilla's official patronages were systematically reallocated, her access to state secrets eliminated, and Princess Anne's decisive intervention recorded as the ultimate pillar of state continuity. The public realized with mounting dread that a constitutional purge of unprecedented magnitude had been executed in absolute secrecy, serving as a dark reminder that sovereign power is never negotiated, it is asserted without mercy. For Camilla, the immediate aftermath of the decree was a living nightmare of total institutional erasure. The vast, intricate network of political alliances, personal secretaries, and senior duties she had spent decades painstakingly constructing vanished in a single morning. Her name was scrubbed from official state briefing logs, her personal household staff disbanded, and her public schedule reduced to an empty expanse. Confined to a gilded quarantine within her private apartments, she moved through silent, carpeted hallways where courtiers who had once bowed with servile deference now passed her with averted eyes. The terrifying tragedy of her downfall cut to the very core of her soul. She had endured decades of public vilification, media hostility, and societal rejection to reach the apex of royal status, only to be cast down by the very husband she believed would protect her to his last breath. Her loss of authority was total, final, and absolute, a silent, living exile within the palace walls where her presence was reduced to the haunting shadow of a ruined ambition. Meanwhile, the crushing weight of this new reality settled heavily upon the shoulders of Prince William and Princess Anne. In their respective quarters, there were no celebrations or triumphant toasts, only the cold, fatalistic burden of newly consolidated responsibility. Prince William stepped into an expanded, unchallenged role over the kingdom's governance frameworks, his position as the future sovereign firmly insulated against any future palace subversion. Alongside Catherine, Princess of Wales, who quietly absorbed senior patronages to ensure seamless institutional continuity, William began transforming the household into an unyielding fortress of modern discipline. Princess Anne resumed her vigilant stance as the supreme guardian of the bloodline, ensuring every lingering trace of Camilla's political influence was thoroughly eradicated. They moved forward together with heavy hearts, bound by the tragic understanding that the crown's survival demands the continuous, ruthless suppression of personal desire. For King Charles, the settlement of the crisis brought an agonizing, permanent solitude. Sitting alone in his study, surrounded by red state boxes and constitutional files, the king confronted the hollow, bitter prize of his sovereign victory. He had saved the dynasty, protected his son's sacred inheritance, and fulfilled his sacred oath to the realm, but the cost was his own emotional mortality. The private study, once warmed by shared laughter and intimate confidences, had been transformed into a cold, desolate sanctuary. Every signature he placed upon state documents now felt like an indelible mark upon his broken heart, a tragic monarch who proved to history that love, no matter how fierce, enduring, or deeply rooted, must ultimately be sacrificed upon the unyielding altar of sovereign duty. He had preserved the crown's integrity, but in doing so, he had doomed himself to navigate his remaining years upon the throne in total, unmitigated loneliness. This extraordinary chapter in the annals of power stands as a dark, eternal testament to the uncompromising nature of the British crown. Rulers rise and fall, human hearts break in silence, and personal happiness is sacrificed. But the monarchy endures as an ancient, uncaring leviathan that consumes the individuals who serve it. History does not record the tears wept behind closed doors. It remembers only those who possess the cold fortitude to execute duty above affection. As the twilight deepens over the historic towers of Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace, the line of succession stands firmly secured, forged in the fires of an unforgiving sacrifice. If this breaking dispatch brought you inside the hidden corridors of power, Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more breaking